So I'm Petros. I'm the founder of a startup here in Switzerland from Zurich. We're working on an area, we're digitalizing an area of the circular economy that's referred to as the take back, very specific to the take back. And looking forward to having a chat together around what can make circularity happen.
Great, Petros. Thank you very much for your time today. Yeah, you are concentrating what we often call as the end of pipe. When the whole process has already been fulfilled, more or less, what do we do with what's left? But we both know that that can only be a temporary solution. So perhaps if we can start from back to front, what do you think are the major impediments for that customer experience, especially tied to dealing with that of what's left on the one side, and then of course that relationship that they have to the vendor?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, like, I think what is missing, or why I got involved in Take Back, yeah. If you look at linear economy, like right now, what we're trying to do is like we're trying to have this collection process of materials or products to close the loop through bins. We always see bins appear in the whole system. Okay, like whether it's public bins, okay, they don't call them bins anymore, but now we have these textile recycling bins where you put everything in. It's a bin. It doesn't stop being a bin just because you've named it something else or they haven't even. So in that context, I think the element, if we want to talk about circularity, we need to get rid of the concept of a bin and redefine how items come back into the influence. And that's the next thing, is like, I think brands and the companies that produce these products need to be involved with the second half of the loop. Okay, and why is that? Is because if they built it, they know how to disassemble it. They'll be the best entities, the best parties to come up with smart solutions of what to do with the products that they initially built. And we know another thing about brands is they just love to have touch points with consumers. Doesn't matter what the touch point is for a brand at any given time. The more touch points they can build with consumers, the greater potential they have to increase the awareness of their brand and do what they're built to do: sell their products better. Okay, so I think, and that's the part that we leverage, is like, okay, there's this touch point at a different stage in the product cycle. Like usually brands are constantly going after customers at the beginning of the product cycle where they're trying to sell. So they're trying to get customers into their stores to buy their products. And then there is this other moment in the product cycle at the end of its use. Okay, and there, I think there we do not hold judgment towards the consumer. Although we would like to see them really use products until their end of life, the reality is most consumers, for whatever reason, certain consumers are very consumer centric and they just want the new model every 6 months or whatever the time lapse might be. Other consumers outgrow the item that they've bought, so they've changed their lifestyle. It doesn't fit their lifestyle anymore. They don't do the sport that they were doing 2 years ago. They switch sport. All these things kind of reach. That's the end of the life cycle of the product, where they're no longer serving a purpose to the person that bought them, and that's when a brand can leverage that moment in time to build a new touch point with consumers. And that's what iKeep does, to pull back those items into the sphere of influence of the brand and drive them into end of life activities, or whether that is secondhand. And this is something maybe we can talk about today. There's been, since the beginning of the year, there's been a lot of movement on LinkedIn around secondhand. And secondhand is great. I'm neither against it, but I think it's a good thing as long as it's built with the notion of circularity. Secondhand is something that extends a product's life. So if a brand is taking its dead stock and selling it as secondhand, this is not circularity, right? If it's taking physically used products from its customers in the market, repairing it, refurbishing it, and placing it back into the market, then it starts being circularity. But the brand needs to maintain this take back process, meaning it has to be able to service, first of all, its customers that bought the initial product with a take back so that they can return their items, but also to the people that they've sold the secondhand item to. If there's no take back in place for that secondhand item, it's going to end up there where we didn't want it to go in the first place. That's a waste bin. It's like you don't see it when you see posts on circularity, when you see articles around circularity. Take back doesn't really stand out much. You always hear about the reuse, the refurbish, the recycle, the repurpose, the repair, or you hear all the reuse, but in actual fact, all the reuse are only made possible if there's a well-functioning take-back behind it. It's the take-back that gels them all together, and if we can't nail the take-back, then all the reuse, let's call them reuse for the sake of it, are functioning independently. And circular economy is not a system that functions with independent units. It functions by all units coming together to work in order to extend the life cycle, the lifespan of a product, and make sure it ends up at its end of life in the right end of life solution, whether that is energy recovery, material recovery, component recovery. What you want to do is you want to extend the product's life cycle for as long as possible through secondhand, through repair, through refurbish. And when it's really reached its maximum capabilities as a product, then be able to place it into one of these three areas. I would say it's component recovery, material recovery, or energy recovery. And again, I don't think we need to be judgmental about the three. We are very judgmental at the moment as a society towards these three components. Like the energy recovery guys are seen really the bad guys of the whole thing. Then the recycling guys is like, yeah, this is not circular. It's not. Like, first of all, we built products for the last 100 years that are not made for circularity. Okay, so the reality is all the products that we've dumped onto the market are probably gonna be energy recovery. It's the sad news to everyone out there. There will be a very small portion that are truly designed or able, in the context of what we've built until now, to drive material recovery or component recovery from our products. So we don't need to judge whether and which one is bad, but be able to create a flexible system whereby over time we prioritize greater material recovery, greater recycling, greater component recovery from our... And I think that's the interesting element. I think it's two things if you break it down to the work that we're doing. The one is the beauty that Take Back offers to brands in terms of a new touch point with consumers. Yeah, it can create an amazing customer experience for brands, and this is something that all brands want. Okay. And the second part is that Take Back is the one piece that gels everything together. So it might not be the sexiest part. Yeah, secondhand is always better, and recycling is more like technical. But if you boil it down to it, is the little components that make everything work. The Swiss are pretty good at doing this type of stuff. They in engineering, they usually do like very specific small components, the Swiss, that make the whole system. They're actually pretty known about that in the manufacturing process. Yeah, and there we go. I think that kind of summarizes why we do Take Back and what we're doing.
You mentioned a number of things. One of the points that I think is very important, and well, a few things. First of all, not to go ahead and select certain individuals as being the boogeyman, the person who's responsible for all of this death and destruction, because that was a design problem, wasn't it? Or design concept or design intention, so that we have products that fall into obsolescence. And so therefore, just staying with that of what you mentioned, we cannot turn back the hands of time. We are talking about products that are already out there, so we cannot magically make them recyclable or make them circular. That is a design question. So my follow-up question is actually twofold. First of all, how do we identify this as being a design problem and react to those things that need to take place now, understanding that this is a process that will go through various iterations. And then the second part would be primarily this take back that you're talking about. Are we able to change the narrative so that we can bring it back to reality a little bit and understand this is the problem we're going to have to deal with? So how can we manage this in the most efficient way and make sure that people understand the efforts that are actually being made? And I think that's very much tied to the brand.
So I think there is so we see a lot of companies talking about designing for circularity and like focusing on this element. Okay. Again, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing that companies are thinking about the design of their products, but they're kind of digging a hole in water, okay? And we know this from the linear economy, okay? We know in the linear economy, and this was a story right at the beginning of the linear economy when commerce started, even if you build the most amazing product in the world, if you cannot get it to your customers, it won't fly, okay? And the truth is, inverted for the circular economy. If you design if you spend millions, and it's a shame, I feel really sad seeing nice companies design products to be circular, but have the faintest idea of how they're going to pull that product back into their sphere of influence after they've placed it on the market. Most companies have no contact. Once they've sold their product, they have no idea where this product is in the market, okay? And if you can't control that element, you have no capabilities in taking advantage of the circularity designs that you built into your product. So it's like, guys, first of all, if you design for circularity, if we start designing for circularity today, it's going to be 5, 6, 7 years before we start seeing the potential of them. And if you haven't solved the take back element, you're not going to see the upside of your circular design. You're not. It's like, and what brands tend to do is like, we have control over the design element, so it's the easiest part for us to invest money into, okay? But the reality is, and this is what I tell most brands, that's not your starting point. Your starting point is like, make sure that any of your customers that bought your product can physically send it back to you. Go about it from a different element. Go about it by just wanting to reconnect with your customer. Don't put at the heart of this connection your product. It might not be circular at the moment. It might truthfully, and you have to be very transparent with your customers so that you don't land in the bucket of greenwashing, okay? It might truthfully be that nearly every item that you will take back today ends up in energy recovery. It's better in energy recovery than dumped in some landfill in Peru or Indonesia or shipped to Africa where they don't have any waste management infrastructure. If you're selling in Europe and you have a take back, it might end up in energy recovery. It will go there, but you will advance from there. What will you build from there? You will see the flow of your products back into your sphere of influence. You can start to think design elements. You can start to think which components can be reused. Okay, you can collect data. Okay, so really build that connection with your customers. And the main element is like, okay, how do I start this without it being a cost center? Connect with your customers. That is the main thing. What do you want? You need to connect with if your customer is sending back his trainers, his sneakers, he's probably looking to replace his sneakers. Your component as a company of reconnecting at that moment gives you the opportunity to make sure your customer doesn't switch to your competitors. Okay, retain your customers. Focus on the business elements that drive your current business model, knowing that over time you're going to switch to a more advanced circular business model. Okay, but use this moment to collect data and understand what circularity means for you. Many brands they assume that they have a recyclability model or a secondhand model. They don't understand that they're moving on just a gut feeling rather than letting data and facts drive the decision making. Okay, so yeah, I think it's to your question, I think design for circularity is really important, but it's not where the journey begins. The journey begins by you just, first of all, being accountable for what you put onto the market. I think that's where the journey begins. If you as a company understand that you place something onto the market and you want to do everything possible to take it back from your customers. You want to reconnect with your customers. You want to build a relationship around this concept, and then start the journey on the back end, on the industrial side. And I will explain this in a second, on designing for circularity, if you want. Now, you said, how's this possible? I think the existence, the emergence of the internet is what makes this possible. Meaning that until the time where most brands depended on brick and mortar stores to sell their products, or retailers, to sell their products, this is very hard to make a take back that is scalable, that has the reach that the brand needs. Meaning, if like I bought a pair of Adidas pair of shoes in the southern part of Italy, and there's only really a third-party retailer that is selling multi-brand sneakers, it's very hard to build a take back with this type of relationships. It's not doable. But the emergence of e-commerce, the emergence of an online store that belongs to a brand, and this online store is omnipresent to everybody in the market. It means it's the portal of the brand to the entire nearly world. Theoretically speaking, at least, the brand has the capacity to sell its products directly to its customers anywhere in the world. Okay, then the inverted is true also, meaning that portal that was the access point to the world is also the access point to return stuff back to the brand, without the need of third parties, of physical components. And that unlocks the true potential of building takebacks, which are scalable and frictionless for consumers. That's also, it's frictionless. The brands have built these systems to be frictionless for their customers, and accessible to any corner of the planet, nearly. So if a brand is selling within its e-commerce space to specific markets, it can also use that point of contact to pull its products back and close its loops, if you want. And that then unlocks the potential, if you want, of moving towards circularity.
Thank you for that. I have another two-prong question for you. What I heard you say almost makes me think that the only way of making this happen is by propagating what we call a vertical supply chain. In other words, you are involved with pretty much each step of the process. And of course, one of the big challenges that we have is that companies are concentrating on specific touch points, but they're not really cognizant of the entire journey for the customers. Otherwise, if they were looking at it from a journey perspective, then they would be very aware of what you're talking about, wouldn't they?
Certain companies are. I mean, like if you take Apple, they are aware of it. I think from their perspective, I think I don't know why the limitations of there's a technical limitation to them deploying the solution, if you want. There is not many companies build out these type of ecosystems themselves. Okay, you have to build out the ecosystem. It's not necessarily there. They have to build in expertise. They have to bring in people, not necessarily like which is not necessarily it's not directly linked, okay, to their sales, to their business units. So they're investing into something that is new. So I think that's why companies like iKeep emerge, if you want.
Which is all good news for those third parties that actually have an overview of that much more than what the original organizations have. We notice quite often, though, if I could just stay with this concept of the journey and the touch points, that regardless of whether we're talking about circularity or not, we have different players in the journey, and very often these will be different departments, or they could be different organizations, and their beginning and middle and end is all tied to what's taking place under their domain. In other words, the actual touch point, where they're saying, oh, our touch point is managed great. But what they fail to realize is that the customer doesn't give a toss about that individual touch point. They care about the entire experience. And so to come up with that design of the ecosystem, don't we have to start in truly understanding what the entire experience is?
Yeah, I think from a consumer perspective, I mean, it's two things, okay? I think the first problem that is occurring is that when you talk about circularity, it's being dumped onto the sustainability departments, okay? It's seen as sustainability, okay? So it's being sent to people that will look, and I've got nothing wrong with sustainability, okay? And that's why it's constantly emerging as a thing. I need to have like, how do you call it? Recycling solutions, or I need to have life extensive product extension life, like secondhand solutions if you want, or building products to last longer. Sustainability looks at things this way, okay? They're usually more scientific background, whereas Take Back is a loyalty program, okay? Take Back is not a, although it's not necessarily sustainability driven, okay? It enables how do you call it? It enables, if you want, activities that are sustainable to happen or that are linked to circular economy. But in its practice, Take Back is a loyalty thing. Why is it a loyalty? I'm offering some sort of reward to my customers to come back, to engage with my brand on the principle that they're going to send something they've used before back to me. Okay, so it's who's working with it. And I think if brands involved more their loyalty departments, their marketing departments into the component of Take Back, not circularity, okay? I think that's also the thing, is like, so we think that we have to deploy the whole thing in one go, which is not really true. Like in linear economy, different parts of the linear model exist to different departments, belong to different departments. The same here. And as for the experience of consumers, I think it's like what is the journey they want to see for the products that they bought, okay? At the moment, what do we know? Even in the most advanced markets like Switzerland, for instance, there is a severe challenge, okay? And we see it from the consumer electronic space. There's a severe challenge in getting consumers. So in Switzerland, I don't know about Austria, but in Switzerland, we have what we call an EPR program, okay? Extended Producer Responsibility Program, which means a Swiss person can literally take any electronic item, from his charger, his cable, his mobile phone, his electronic appliance, to his TVs, anything that is electronic. It's not limited to any electronic store, and just drop it off. I mean, and yet things are stuck in Swiss households. So Swisscom, the main mobile provider, telephone provider, expects that 8 million mobile units, sitting around in Swiss households. The Swiss population is 8 million people. Okay, so there's one mobile phone in every household, sitting just dormant, unused, in households. What does that mean? It means either the consumer is not aware of the service. That's also a possibility, or it's just not practical for them. They don't see the experience. So we know that these drop-off points, which is what we're trying to base on, at least in the textile industry, or we know which is the go-to solution for Take Back, drop-off points, doesn't seem to really work that well. Okay, and yet we're pushing it more and more down the road. There's a second element to it, like, if you create drop-off points for your Take Back, you've detached the main players from the whole thing, which is the brands. Not because they have to be accountable, but if I put an iPhone with a Samsung phone, with a Xiaomi phone, with all these phones all end up in the same place, how do we want then the brand to think on the design phase circular if they're never going to see their product again? they're not going to design for circularity. There's no point in designing for circularity. If I don't see the benefit as a brand, I'm not creating a new touch point with my customer. My product's not falling in the sphere of influence of my company. Why would I go and spend millions to design for circularity if the flow of products is not passing through my business anymore? Okay. The second is, we know that brands are spending a lot on e-commerce, like driving direct sales to B2C, directly to your household. And that is the experience that we can build on. Okay. And again, as an experience, and that's part of iKeep's business, okay, we create that customer experience. Okay. So our purpose is to create the take back experience in the most beneficial way for the brand to connect emotionally with its customers on the concept of take back. Okay, so that's our purpose, because we know if we can build that emotional connection, if we can build excitement at that point, then we will unlock the possibility of flow. And what happens is, we believe, and we'll see this, a brand feels more comfortable. There's an entity behind, right? If I tell you, go and dump your phone, your clothes, a lovely jacket, let's say a nice jacket which you're not wearing anymore, put it in a bin somewhere, wherever that might be, even if it's in a store, it doesn't stop being a bin, right? You have a certain emotional negativity to the idea that you bought this jacket which served you for a long time, you really liked it, whatever the reason, you don't want it anymore, and you're going to put it in a bin. If you're handing it back in the way that you buy to the brand, the mindset around what's happening is very different. It's not a bin anymore. I'm receiving something new from the brand. And that's what we leverage. We receive this moment. It's the moment you receive something new from the brand. So we integrate the take back into the purchasing experience. Okay, that's what we do at iKeep. Okay, it's like we integrate the take back is not a standalone service, but an integrated feature into the purchasing experience of the brand. So now what happens is we create an emotional bond between the brand, the customer, the product that they're buying, and the product that they're turning back. Okay, so all of a sudden you have this very unique experience whereby I'm very excited about what I'm receiving, and I'm feeling good that the person that I bought it from is going to take accountability and responsibility for the item I don't want anymore. I'm not seeing a bin anymore. I'm seeing an e-commerce return, which I've associated with something that is good and I'm getting paid for it. Yeah, so I'm getting a reward for it. There's a valorization, a mindset valorization to the item that I'm trading in. So I think if you leverage these elements so that the consumer is not dealing anymore with a waste stream, but dealing with a product, then we should see on the gates open up and flow of product occur better between brands and consumers, if you want, which is what we want to see, is like see scalable flows of products moving so that they can flow into the right end of life solutions, if you want.
If we think about the overall experience, it would make sense that it's a collection of stage gate scenarios. In other words, you continue with whatever that transaction may be, as long as the experience fulfills whatever the need may be for the individual. Within that of what we're talking about, the end of pipe, if I can stay with that phraseology, then that would mean that would most likely be the last action to be found within that experience. What you're doing is actually twofold. If I pick it up right, you are trying to put a positive spin or to enhance the experience from a sustainability perspective for the customer, in that you are closing the loop in a much more meaningful way vis-a-vis sustainability. And then of course the necessity to make sure that from a branding perspective, that the brand has that information that they wouldn't have otherwise, because they have no clue what's actually taking place end of pipe. Means that actually you're performing a bottom-up analysis, because they will need that information to improve that experience upstream eventually, because without having that information downstream, they cannot improve it upstream, right?
Exactly. And they also have, that's exactly the point. If they get that information at the end of the pipe, like you call it, then they can take decisions on how to move forward, but also they're in control. I think what is missing today at the end of pipe is the capacity to give the control to the brand of what happens to their products. Recyclers are not accountable to the brand. They're receiving the products of the brand, yeah, and it can go from any brand, right? Brands like Prada, from brands like Prada all the way to brands like H&M. If you are looking at we're talking about and it's the same for consumer electronics, right? Like brands like Apple, all the way. If your product ends up in the collection stream, which is built at the moment in Europe, the brands have no real way to hold accountable the recyclers of what is happening, or the secondhand players of what is happening with their products. They don't have a say. They're not in control. They can't even choose the recycler they want to work with because they don't know where their products are, right? And I think it's not about, there's a certain level of accountability for the brand. Of course, I place these items onto the market, and therefore I should be accountable for finding smart ways to do with the products after my customers have finished using them. But it's also giving the power to the brands to decide who they're going to work with, why they're going to work with these people, you know? Then there's then all of a sudden, the elements that we see in waste management, which is electronics being dumped in open landfills in Ghana, textiles being sent to the top of to deserts in Peru, okay, or dumped in the secondhand market of Africa. If the flow of product, if I am a brand and I'm working with a recycler who is engaged in these type of activities, I can hold the recycler accountable for these type of activities. I can whistle blow him out, you know, because I don't want my stuff to end up down there. Yeah, you want to work with me? Do my products have value? That's also the thing. One of the biggest thing for the current textile industry, yeah, is the secondhand market potential of the items. Okay, so there's a very big difference of collecting items from one brand versus another one, depending on how well they sell in the secondhand market, in developing markets. So, for instance, football jerseys have a very high selling potential in the African markets. Okay, now if I'm Puma or if I'm Adidas and I take my football jerseys back, I can build out strong supply chains or stronger partnerships that ensure my jerseys don't end up in landfills, but I still leverage what the value is of the product that I have, right, for the market. I'm giving the power to the brand to work these type of relationships forward, and of course benefit from the revenue streams that occur from these things. I mean, this is also, the brands need to make money, so like they will always think of revenue, and I think this is the key component of having the take back pass through the brand and not functioning as an independent unit, something which nobody's really is a black hole, if you want. At the end of the day, that's what it is. These bins, even in the stores, these bins in the stores, there we see them in Zara. Maybe Zara put them, but Zara has no control, for instance, or like when we see these bins in the stores or in the flagship stores of brands, the brands themselves cannot stop you from putting other brands' products inside those bins. And I'm not going to sit over this box and wait to see who's going to put what in there. You got to have an employee standing there to figure out. And that's a problem. It's a problem for two reasons. As a brand, I have no capabilities of dealing with the circularity of a product of another brand. That's not possible. Yeah, I don't know the product of the brand. I wouldn't be able to drive strategies. I'm not interested to drive strategies forwards for another brand. Okay, that is not mine. And the other one, you're not sorting at source. We know from the recycling industry that the number one element of a successful recycling program, or waste management program, is getting things to be sorted at their source of use. Okay, at the level of the household. Don't know about Austria, but in Switzerland, for instance, we try to keep aluminium outside of the general metal stream. We keep PET bottles outside of the plastic stream. There's a reason why we do that. The more efficient, the more uniform our stream is, the greater our capacity to integrate good technologies onto that material flow. And it's the same for any other product that we're trying to build circularity for. The more uniform it is, and the more specific it is, and the more accurate the flow is, the greater potential we can drive out of material recovery from it. Okay, and that process needs to start from the household. It needs to start from consumers. So how can we sort at source? One thing we can sort from is brand. We can sort by the brands we buy from. We know the brand most of the times. For the most part, we know more or less the brands that the item that we sending back is from a specific brand. And then by product type. So is it a t-shirt? Is it pants? This we can physically, visually distinguish. Is it a hoodie? Is it a mobile phone, a screen? So that's another sorting element that we can work on. And then over time, maybe this is the next step, the better step. Then we start talking about integration of digital product passports, so that we can start to sort, enable sorting as an experience, if you want, greater, based on material type. So it's brand, product type, and the final one, which will unlock the real potential of circularity, is material type. Can we deliver technology? Can we build take-back solutions and technology that allow consumers to sort at this level without it being a headache? Yeah. To this extent, at iKeep, I think we've already reached the point where we can sort by brand and by product type. The next step in our journey will be to see if we can take that a notch higher, and by material type, see if we can work with brands to do that. For certain brands, it's possible. For others, it's not. Okay. And I think once we start to see that, yeah, then we start to see flows of products that can really go into whether it's secondhand and repair, yeah, whether it's or repair and secondhand, whether it's disassembly and material recovery or component recovery. Then we can start to unlock both those really, really well over time, if you want.
You mentioned the idea of how the competing brands are managing with this process, and that it would not be the responsibility of your own brand to manage that process for them. The converse is also true, that you want to be very cognizant of what the other brands are actually doing, because it's all about your positioning. And I think there's another element that we need to look at here, and this question of scarcity. If we look at positioning scarcity, and that you have a much more valuable product than vis-a-vis your competition, then that is to be found throughout the entire chain. So if while I'm listening to you, Petros, I'm thinking about that landfill in Africa where you have H&M and Prada on the same heap, which means that you're actually you're ruining your brand by that association. So I really wonder to what the message has to be for companies to understand that this is not a sustainability or an ESG question, but rather it's all about the brand, and they have to understand the importance of what's actually taking place here.
Yeah, and I think so. I mean, I think it's less for Prada than it is for H&M, because nobody wants to. But
I'm just using it as an example.
Yeah, exactly. I think from that perspective is look, you do not. I think brands didn't have the solution to it until now. It was very hard. If I think the emergence of e-commerce as space to connect with, and they might have not figured it out until now. Okay, if you didn't have the online store, building this type of take back would not be possible. Okay, most brands do not have stores in cities. Okay, they might have stores in the big cities, Vienna. If you go outside the cities, they don't have stores. There's little they can do to build a take back which can really drive their products back to their offices or to their sphere of influence, if you want. So I think definitely, and they will build the take back for different reasons, right? If you're H&M, for example, you're looking at where you're building you're dumping immense amount of product onto the market. Closing the loop is more about closing the material loop for you. if you're a big brand like Prada, and this is a little bit of a difficult discussion like that we're having, yeah, is like um, because many brands see take back as the idea, for instance, especially the high-end brands, okay, they're like, oh, but why would somebody want to send me back the expensive, lovely item that they own? It's like, man, you're, and especially if I'm not going to recycle it, right? Who wants to recycle a beautiful item, that a cashmere top that is like, look, you got to see it from a different angle, from the experience of the consumer again. It's like, me, if I've got your top, and for whatever reason, again, it's not about judging the individual consumers, right? We're 9 billion people now on the planet. We're all very different. We all have different behaviors. Certain consumers will just outgrow the item that they bought, yeah, and they just don't want it in their home anymore. Like it's like stuffing up my home, man. It's like filled up. Our cellars are full of stuff. Our cupboards are full of stuff. Our drawers are full of stuff. We just want viable, attractive solutions to empty out those areas for different reasons. If it's H&M, for instance, we keep on saying H&M, maybe don't, but like if it's H&M, the chances are is the t-shirt after a couple of years, it's so done, it's going in the bin. So for me, it's more sending back my item to H&M because I don't want to put it in the bin. I feel bad about putting it in the bin. If it's a premium brand, it's like, and I'm not wearing it anymore, I'm not using it anymore, I haven't put it in those textile bins because I just don't feel good about putting something beautiful that I once bought into a textile bin. Yeah. So what I really want is like, look, give me the opportunity to find something that is useful to me in my everyday life, and I'll give you back what I actually bought from you. Give me a service. It's not about you as a brand. It's more about you offering a service to your customers that solves a pain for them. Be aware of that pain. Yeah. Solve that pain for them, which is these overloaded closets, and then be smart about what you're going to do with the item that you get back. Right. And it's about telling a story, and that's something in linear economy. Brands are so good at telling stories, right? They even said the other day, with the emergence, what was the in the future, fashion will only be about telling stories. Like it's like a storytelling. The same with your take back. Why you're doing your take back is not the same for it's not a uniform story for everyone. Different brands will build a take back for a different reason, and they just got to tell their story authentically so that it speaks also to their customers, and they just make that new connection, that new relationship, that new emotional interaction with their customers based on their take back, which just gets them to come and interact with their brand again, right? And I think that's what the bigger, more premium brands need to think of in terms of take back, rather than why would somebody trade in their I don't know what, their fancy clothes to us? Like, why don't they keep it forever? They're also caught up in this story that they're like if you look at the brands like Louis Vuitton and these ones, they want to be a heritage brand, meaning that you hand down in generations the product. The bag that you bought now, you will hand it to your daughter, or the jacket that you bought, you hand it. But this is stories of the past. I don't. Very few people still do that type of it. But this was in the 50s, 60s, 70s when these brands emerged in the beginning. Now it's not the truth anymore, if you want, unfortunately.
Yeah, mindsets have a very long shelf life, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And it takes a while for all of us to get past that. There's one last point. I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about something that we had shared in previous conversations, and this was this idea of the cooperative shift. We were talking about the actual roles and responsibilities and the actions that are taking place, and we know all too well that for us to reach that circularity, that we need to perpetuate some sort of change in some fashion. But this doesn't happen as one fell swoop. And so you had some very interesting ideas that tied to this cooperative shift, where we are right now, what kind of conversations or what kind of dilemmas all the players currently have, and what needs to be overcome for us to actually finally close the loop in whatever time frame we have to actually complete that.
Mm. So it's more, I think, cooperation. I think there is. It's more of a coordinated. And again, it's like when I look at the waste industry. Okay, I think the waste industry is they're all hungry when we talk about waste, and secondhand now has also come into the mix, which is funny enough. Yeah, when we talk about waste to energy or recycling, or component recovery, and I separate component recovery from recycling, or secondhand, they're all after the same feedstock. Yeah, more or less. Okay, so there's this flow of product, and we imagine it is like this flow of product moves into the industries. And what's happening, well, what happened until now in the waste industry, and it's still happening in Switzerland, for example. So we got to split the waste industry into two type of products. Yeah, low valued items. So these are the packaging stuff that we see. Okay, like PET bottles and the cardboard boxes, paper, this type of products. And then you have high valued items, which is the clothing items that we wear, consumer electronics, toys, things like that, furniture, for that matter. I think what happens here, and what we've seen from the low valued items, is these business models are cannibalizing each other. Okay, meaning the energy waste to energy systems or providers, yeah, are trying to scramble for the waste stream that is going to the recyclers. The recyclers it's like a constant battle. Who's going to take the waste stream from the market? Yeah, it's like a fight. There's even in Switzerland, for example, they import waste. Okay, to keep the system running. This is a no-go type of environment. I mean, if you're working on this type of if these elements are working independently and are cannibalizing each other, you're going to hit a brick wall at some point. So it's what I think is like more what we need to start doing is, or what we should try doing is, how does the individual solution or technology, yeah, solution meaning secondhand, fit into the life cycle of an individual product? Okay, if we can build material flows that are very specific, yeah, then what we want to do is we want to have a life extension solutions built into the product. So repair secondhand as many times as possible, just keep it flowing back, and then at the end of it, being able to and I think, to be very honest, AI and machine learning will be the key there. That's where I see, to make the decision of what an item should end up in. Should it end up in energy recovery? I don't see us like eliminating energy recovery from the mix altogether. I don't believe this is possible. Materials wear and tear to a certain point that they're just done for. It's not even realistic. I mean, even in nature, yeah. We talk about nature many times. When you see a tree, yeah, in the winter, and it loses its leaves, and the leaves drop below, and it snows below the tree, there's always no snow, because the heat of the decomposition of the material is generating heat, is generating energy for the tree, right? So energy and decomposition into energy is part of the material cycle, if you want. It has to be, okay. For certain products, maybe the human-made materials can be kept in a material loop forever if we can do chemical recycling. So I think it's more about using, and I think that's where we can go, is like making the decision making into which stream the product should end up with through AI. So like really deciding this item is still okay to go into secondhand. This item should fit into material recovery. And I think this is where we can advance to over time and see all the components working together to maximize the resource potential of an individual product, if you want.
I'd like to stay with that example of the tree and the leaves, because if we look at nature, we can make the claim that nature is very wasteful, because what nature produces is not necessarily used in a transactional way as we know this as human beings. But the difference is we don't call it waste. And I think that that's a point that you have raised throughout our conversation, not necessarily referring to it that way, but you come up with this analogy of the bin, which automatically assumes that we're talking about something that is to be disposed of, instead of actually keeping the cycle alive or looking at this as being a possible nutrient. And again, I'm staying with the example of the trees and the leaves, because the leaves are a nutrient for other elements within that ecosystem to thrive. And so I think my question is maybe at least twofold. The first one being, while we still keep continuing to call it waste, we are never going to be able to make that leap into where we need to take it. And so in other words, whatever's left should not be considered waste. Obviously a design problem on the one side, but it's a mental model that we need to overcome. And I think what I've been able to pick up from our conversation, that's something you're very cognizant of. That's something you're trying to do something about. So that would be part of the equation. But at the same time, we need to understand that this doesn't happen overnight. Going back to what we said earlier, we have legacy that we're going to still have to deal with in some fashion. We need to face facts. But at the same token, if we're not able to have a picture of what that circular model needs to look like, then we're never going to make that leap. So from your vantage point right now, where do you see all of this?
So I think we have certain organizations, known organizations like Helen MacArthur and maybe and more of them, like let's put Helen MacArthur, have a certain vision about circularity. Okay, I'm a taunt believer in like just getting started. Okay, just start. Stop trying to see where as most entrepreneurs and like as most adventurists. Like if you see Christopher Colombo, if we talk about people who traveled the world, like they didn't have an end point. They jumped on a boat and they went and they started. They got going, like just get going. And I think that's why I like Take Back so much. It's like, get going. That's the one thing that you can get going with in terms of circularity. Everything else is assumption based. Yeah. You are not. Do you have the ultimate recycling technology? No. Are you going to build it now and have it ready in any time frame next year? No. Is secondhand solves the problem? No, it doesn't, because if I dump secondhand items onto the market at the current model, they're ending up back in the waste stream. Can I design for circularity? Beautiful, noble cause. But if you don't have a take back, it's ending up back in the waste stream, right? So somehow for me, like as an individual that says, okay, I want to move towards a circular model. I have, like most entrepreneurs, yeah, this is a global or societal entrepreneurial journey. Let's put it this way. Circular economy is a socio-economic entrepreneurial journey. It's a real, it won't solve all the problems of the world, but it's a real transition from our current linear model, which has run for like the last 200 years. Let's put it like this, at least. Okay. So it is, there is no way we have, like with every entrepreneurial project, it will pivot many times before it reach its end setup. Okay, it's going to pivot, it's going to change. It's not possible to imagine how it will look like by the end of our journey. All right, so we just go with the vision. We have a good vision around it, around this idea that products are being repurposed, reused, recycled. Okay, but we need to just start the journey, and everybody needs to start. Okay, and I think the starting point is really this take back, get the brands involved, build this customer experience, start the journey, recognize that unfortunately most of your products do end up in the energy recovery cycle. That's the truth. If you're Adidas, if you're most of the big brands, okay, the reality, most of the brands, not most of the big brands, most of the brands, the ones that might have the best potential of circular business models are really small brands, where the owners of the companies have the capacity to be very flexible. They know their products really, really well. So we've seen this in the fashion space, especially if small, like 1 to 10 people fashion brands. know their products so well and are so agile that they can build in business models around circularity. So for them, the journey is a lot faster than big brands, okay? And what big brands want to do is want to see what they're doing, experience the mistakes that the smaller brands are doing, and take knowledge from them, yeah, shift knowledge from them. But the one thing that we can all start with is the story of the take back, transition it with the general understanding that flow of product, we need to sort at source. Yeah, we need to build a consumer experience with it, which is exciting. We have to. It's the same like the linear economy, selling products. We were able to sell products to the world and build consumerism like madness based on the experience we built around selling a product. If we want circularity to happen, we need to build madness around the idea that the consumer can trade in his used items so that the flow occurs, okay? And I think that's the only thing that we do have a relatively good vision, but it's going to change over time. So I think we can slowly over time be aware that things will change, but we've started that. We've opened up the gates. Maybe what I should say also, at least from my perspective, I see the systemic. There are two parts of the loop. Okay. There's the 0 to 180 degrees, which is what happens from the moment a brand has an idea of a product until it puts it on the shelf. Okay, that's the first part of the loop. And we've seen work being done there. In this first part of the loop, you're talking about designing for circularity. You're talking about reducing your energy consumption for production or switching to clean energy sources for your production. You're making sure you're doing zero waste in your production. Okay, you're doing everything possible to not overproduce, but also to not generate as much waste in the production process. And these are elements that you can control. And then the other half of the loop, yeah, that's when a true circular business model occurs, is from the moment the customer bought it until you're able to take back that item and place it back into your manufacturing process, or have a decision of what you're going to do with that money. So that's when the loop has become a closed cycle, regardless of whether we've achieved the maximum capabilities of the loop. We're in a closed loop. Okay, so it doesn't matter if the item ends up, or it does, but like what we want to see is the flow of this circular loop. So I built a product, I brought it to my customer sent it back to me. That is a closed loop. Now, from there, how do we that's the minimal, I call it an MVL, a minimal viable loop. Okay,